Welcome to Hello World program. Today, as you can tell by the lecture name, we'll be looking at a Hello World program. The most efficient way to learn computer science in my eyes is to look at a program and understand, interpret, and interact with it as you read it. So today we're going to be looking at the Hello World program. This is not a complicated program. It simply prints Hello World into your console. Now Hello World is a classic and often used example that is used for introductory programming. We'll also be looking at it, and you should be very excited because this will be your first Java program. So without further ado, let's move to Dr. Java, which will be our IDE or Integrated Development Environment for this course. So here we are at Dr. Java, which you should have installed. If you do not, please take a look at Lecture 2 and get your development environment set up. Now, I agree. This is a lot to take in. So first, let's compile and run the code and make sure that we're getting the right output, which should simply be Hello World. So in this development environment, after you've typed up and saved your code, you go to compile, and then after you've compiled and you see compilation completed, you click the Run button. The Run button runs the program, as you can see, Run Hello World, and then it displays your output, which in this case is Hello World, which is exactly what we wanted. So now we know that the program is functioning fine. But now let's examine the code and see how we can understand how this program is working. But before we do that, let's first start off by identifying some patterns. First of all, there's a rainbow of colors on the screen, and each color has a different significance and function. So every piece of text that has a different color has a different function and significance. As we work through the program, we'll see the significance and function of each of these different colors. There's also a lot of spacing. I want you to think of your coding environment as your endless whiteboard, and please use spacing to make it more readable and usable, and so that you're not confused and not everything's a jumbled mess. As you can see, there's a lot of indentation, which is actually something that's required and we'll be taking a look at later as we go through this program. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of green in the program, and that's what we call comments. Comments are something that the computer doesn't interpret. So as you know that the computer is kind of like, this is a computer program and it's a set of instructions. However, some of these set of instructions the computer ignores, and those are comments. Comments are for the personal programmer's use. When you're writing huge programs, it's often hard to figure out what you're doing at different times when you have a lot of lines of code. So what programmers tend to use is comments so that they understand what's going on. And this is a classic thing that even the highest level programmers use. So even though comments don't have any impact on your actual program result, they're very important to use, and it's important to build a habit of using them. So let's take a look at line 1, which is //helloworld.java. So now this is green in color, which indicates that it's a comment. Now as you can see, there are two slashes in front of the hello world.java. So these two slashes indicate that this is an end of line comment. So we knew it was a comment because it was green in color, and now we know that it's an end of line comment because there are two slashes starting this off. There are a variety of types of comments and they have different uses, and we'll be taking a look at this shortly. But this is an end of line comment, and as you can see after that, I've listed the name, which is hello world.java. Now this part of this comment can be literally anything. I can literally just do this and it's not going to make a difference because the computer won't read it. The computer, when it realizes it's a comment, it ignores it and moves on. So this can be anything I want it to, and it's not going to have any effect on the program. So just to recap, this is an end of line comment, and one part of the end of line comment is that it begins with two slashes, and then you can write whatever you'd like. And the end of line comment can only last on one line. Other comments can span multiple lines, but this one can only last on one line. Now let's look at line 2 and 3. So as you can see, these two lines are green as well, and that means that they're comments. But there's a big difference, and as you can see, the starting for on line 2 is a slash and an asterisk. and this comment ends on line 3 with another asterisk and a slash. So as you can see, this comment is spanning multiple lines, and if you can read inside of it, it says text printing program, which is a description of our program, and it says this comment is shown as a traditional comment. So as you can tell, this is a traditional comment, and the syntax or the rules for creating a traditional comment is that they have to start with a slash and an asterisk and end with an asterisk and a slash. And the difference between a end of line comment and a traditional comment is that traditional comment can span multiple lines, as you can see. If you were to have an end of line comment span multiple lines, it would cause an error. End of line comments are most often used, but traditional comments are used as well when we're spanning across multiple lines. Now we have a blank line in line 4, and now let's take a look at line 5, which says public class hello world. Now this is what is known as a class declaration. As I mentioned earlier, every Java program is required to have a class, and the class is the basic building block of a Java program. So there's at least one in every Java program, as I mentioned. And now let's take a look at class. So class is a keyword that indicates that we're defining a class. We'll be looking more into keywords and classes later in the course, but it's important to know that this class keyword is telling us that we're defining a class, which is the basic building block of a Java program. Next, we also have another keyword called public. Now this is another keyword that has some significance, but right now we're not going to be going over it, and we'll be taking a look at it later in the course. And then we can see the last part of the line, the third word, which is hello world. Now this is the name of the program, which is hello world, and as you can see, this is the class name, and the class name must correspond with the file name, which is helloworld.java. So that you must do that, otherwise it will cause an error. Again, even if you're feeling confused, don't worry, we'll be taking a look at this later in more depth later throughout the course. Now let's move to line 6. Line 6, as you can see, has a brace on it, and it's facing towards the inside. And then if you go down, you can see there's nothing in these lines. But when you reach the bottom, you can see there's another brace, and this time it's facing outwards. So these two braces signify the opening and the end of the Hello World class. Now this is very important because these two braces have great significance. They indicate the start and the end of the class for the computer to understand. So one thing, I want you to think of the computer as a really big fool. Okay, the computer doesn't know anything. The computer has no knowledge. You have to guide the computer through every single action, otherwise it's not going to do anything right. And now everything that's inside of these braces is indented so that the computer knows that it's part of the Hello World class. We'll be looking at this more later in the course as well, but that's important. And it's also referred to as the body. Now, one more thing about this Hello World class name is that it's known as an identifier. An identifier is a series of characters digits, underscores, and dollar signs, and it's basically it's a name for a class or a variable, and we'll be looking at this in more depth in a separate lecture, but it's important to know that it's an identifier. Next, now that we're inside of the body of the class, let's take a look at this line. This is another comment. So if you remember, because it starts with it's green, that means that it's a comment. And then because it has two slashes in front of it, that indicates that it's an end of line comment. So whatever a comment starts with and how long it spans show what type of comment it is. So next up in the next line, we have what I call a method declaration. So this is the main method, and every class usually has a main method. And how do we know it's a method? So as you can see, there's two parentheses over here, one over here and one over here. These two parentheses indicate that we're declaring a method. So now this void keyword, we'll be taking a look at this later as well, but it basically means that the program does not return anything. But don't worry if you don't understand that. It's something that we'll take a look at a little bit later. Now, public and static, as I mentioned earlier, are keywords that we'll be looking at in greater depth later in the course. And string args, that's really complicated right now, and it seems really complicated, but it's actually really simple, and we'll be also looking at this a little bit in more depth. But the important thing to know is that this declaration, public, static, void, main, string args, is a very, very important declaration. It will be present in most of your Java programs for this course, because what this does is this declares the main method. The main method is the main method. A method stands for function, and the main method is the main function that the program does. So everything in the main method, anything that you tell the computer to do within the main method, is executed and the computer listens to you. So now that we know a little bit about the main method declaration, we'll be looking at it later as well, but I recommend that you start to memorize it also, because AP Computer Science is a very basic course, and although it doesn't specifically go over the main method is essential for any Java program. So as you can see, similarly to the class declaration, we have braces. So we have one brace facing inwards over here, and we have another brace facing outwards over here. Now similarly, everything inside of the braces is known as the body of the method, and that is also indented. So obviously now you can see a pattern in Java. Whenever you're making a declaration for a class or the building block of a program, and a method which is part of a class, you can see that you have indentations inside for the body. So next line, let's take a look. And now this is another type of comment, and you can see again that it spans multiple lines, and it's green, so you know it's a comment, but there might be one concern. So you may be thinking that this is a traditional comment, like the one we saw on lines 2 and 3. But there's a small and subtle difference. At the beginning, there's a slash, asterisk, asterisk. Now this is something that is known as the Javadoc comment, and this is classically used before methods when you want to define what the function of a method is. So as you can see inside, I've wrote at return nothing and at param string. So now this is something that's very important and tested on the AP Computer Science test, and that is these two keywords, at return and at param. So we'll be looking at them later, but at return basically signifies what does the program return. And then at param signifies what the parameter of the program is, what the parameter or argument is. Now I do not expect you to know what a parameter or argument is, and we'll be looking at this in greater depth later in the course. So now that we've crossed the Javadoc comment, this is an important practice for methods as well, and it's important to use a Javadoc comment before every method to enhance the readability, and so you know exactly what's going on in the method. Let's look at the most important line of this program, and that is system.out.println parentheses quotation marks hello world quotation marks parentheses and a semicolon. So there's so much inside of this program that it's important to pay attention to. A lot of new concepts are introduced in this simple line of code. So firstly, how do we know this is a method? As we looked at the main method declaration, we know that this is a method because it has parentheses, one over here and one over here. So remember, if we see parentheses, we can determine that whatever is being written is a method. Now, next, let's look at what's inside of here, which is hello world. Now, if you remember, we printed out hello world in our output right over here, and this is where we're indicating that hello world is present. So first of all, we need to notice that it's red, and it's red because it's a string. A string is something that is really essential to Java, and we'll be taking a very good look at a little bit later, but for now I want you to remember it's a string. And now you may be wondering, when we printed out the program, there weren't any quotation marks in the result. I don't see any quotation marks here. But if you look over here, we have quotation marks. Now these quotation marks serve a very, very important purpose, The purpose of these quotation marks is to indicate to the computer, which remember, the computer is not smart. The computer has no common sense. So this is to indicate to the computer that whatever we're getting printed out is a string. And that's why the computer colors it red and knows what it's printing out. Now, the rest of this line is system.out.println. So this is the name of a method. We'll be looking at what methods are and everything like that later. But if you remember when we talked about it, the method is kind of like the behavior of a class. So this method is telling the computer that please output hello world. We'll be looking at this in more detail in the output lecture, but the important thing to understand is that basically system.out.println is a method or a function that tells the computer to print out whatever is in between the parentheses. Now that we're talking whatever is in between the parentheses, that's known as the argument. So the argument of this program is whatever is in between the parentheses. For any method, whatever is in between the parentheses is known as an argument. We'll be taking a look at this again in more depth. I know this seems really confusing and tedious, but it's important to establish some of the important parts and look at our first Java program. There's some topics that I don't expect you to understand right now, and it's good if you're not understanding them right now. It's just important to know the different keywords, and we'll be looking at them in more depth later. So we see now that we're speaking about arguments, we see one argument which is in between the parentheses on system.out.println. There's actually another argument in this program, which as we were looking at the main method declaration, we can see in between the parentheses we have string args. Now this keywords probably make no sense to you, which is not a problem, but understand that this is also an argument. Now the last part of this line, if you notice, it's a pretty subtle thing, but it's the semicolon. And the semicolon is one of the most important parts of a Java program. At the end of every statement that we're making, so this is a statement because it's telling something the program should do. At the end of every statement, there's usually a semicolon. Without the semicolon, this program would not work. So let me just delete this program, this semicolon, my bad, and let me recompile. And as you can see, I got an error, and it says line 12, which is this one. So now, if I were to replace the semicolon, save the program, compile, and now the compilation is completed without a problem. So as you can see, that semicolon is something that can simply cause a mistake. And this often throws off programmers, so it's important to remember your semicolons, because that's often a source of error. And then, lastly, one of the things that the semicolon falls under is known as the syntax. The syntax is the rules for the programming language. So the syntax for Java includes having semicolons at the end of statements. Now let's look at the rest of the lines. So on the next line, we can see we have a brace, which signifies the end of the body of the main method, and then we have an end of line comment, which says end of main method. Now moving to the next line, we have another brace facing outsideward, and we can see that this also indicates the end of the public class, and this is the body within it, and this indicates, so as you can see, we have said end of the class, and that's the culmination of the program. Right here we have another end of line comment, but that's all we have for the program. Now I encourage you to run this program in your own Dr. Java. And this should be the output. You should have an output of hello world, and you can download this file. It's attached as a resource to this lecture, but make sure that it's working. If it's not working, please refer to lecture 2 and make sure that you have properly installed all of the components, including the JDK or Java Development Kit. And if you're still having any problems, feel free to email help@apcs.tv and somebody will be able to help you. Now, as the last part of this program, let's change this word, hello world, to something like Moksh is awesome, which is true, but that's not the point right now. The point is, now that we know that Moksh is awesome, let's compile again. And now let's run the program. And now you can see we ran hello world, and now it prints Moksh is awesome. So as you can see, we can modify this part to anything, but it's really essential that you maintain the quotation marks. Now this is all I have for the Hello World program. I hope this isn't discouraging you. It should be difficult, it should be confusing, but it's important that you understand some of the things I went over. And congrats, you finally got your first Java program down. Make sure you test it on your own Dr. Java to make sure everything is working. And again, congrats on your Java program.